Welcome to Module 9, Reading Comprehension. The ultimate goal of any reader is to understand what they read. If it's a work of nonfiction, they will want to understand and likely apply what they have read. If it's a work of fiction, then they'll want to understand and hopefully enjoy what they have just finished reading. Being able to decode words, know what they mean, and put them together in phrases and paragraphs is not enough to accomplish this. Strong readers have at their disposal a set of comprehension skills and strategies that help them understand what they are reading. This module continues to focus on specific tutoring techniques that you will use to help learners develop the 4 components of reading. In each of these modules, we have focused on 3 things: understanding what tutors and learners are trying to accomplish, identifying and practicing specific teaching techniques and strategies, and pinpointing where in the lesson the instruction and strategies fit. And although we will address the components of reading instruction in a specific order, that doesn't mean the skills are meant to be taught in the same order. You'll find as you work with learners that instruction moves around from one component to another, and that many of the activities you do with your learner will focus on more than one reading skill. During this particular presentation, we will identify the comprehension skills and strategies learners need, define 3 levels of reading comprehension: literal, inferential, and critical thinking, learn to use a before, during, and after approach to developing reading comprehension, learn to use graphic organizers such as a KWL chart to aid reading comprehension, and to practice using the think-aloud technique to model what good readers do. Let's start though with that KWL chart. What do I already know? What do I want to learn? And what did I learn? Tutors generally find graphic organizers useful when helping learners to develop their comprehension skills. Graphic organizers are simply tools that help learners to organize their ideas and their understanding of what they're reading into a visual format. Shown here is an example of a very simple KWL chart. In the first column, the learner would write what they already know about a topic. So they would do that prior to reading. In the second, what they want to learn from reading the text. And in the last, what they learned from the text. Now, they can add items to the second and third columns as they read, and use the third column to summarize what they've learned after they finish reading as well. You've been provided a handout called KWL chart. You'll notice that actually this handout includes 2 different charts. One, the one that you see above, and the second, a KWLH chart. This chart adds a column for how can I learn more? The H is for how. You can make copies of these to use with your learners. Next, we're going to talk about some basic principles for reading comprehension and comprehension instruction, and then we'll look at the specific teaching techniques. First, the learner must recognize that the purpose of reading is to understand what is being read, to get meaning from the text. Many adults may not even be aware they have a comprehension problem. They often associate reading with decoding properly and do not recognize when what they've read doesn't make sense. Once learners recognize that they need to understand what they're reading, that it's supposed to make sense to them, they can begin to employ monitoring strategies that will improve their comprehension. Reading comprehension requires a solid foundation of reading skills, alphabetics and word analysis, fluency, and vocabulary. Strong readers need a large foundational vocabulary to understand what they're reading. They need to recognize a large number of words by sight so they can read fluently. And they need strong decoding skills when they encounter words they haven't seen before. This is why we are always working with learners to improve and strengthen these particular skills. Researchers often use the term "make meaning from text" to define comprehension. That phrase indicates that the reader goes through a very active process to interact with and comprehend the text. Many new readers are unaware that good readers interact and engage with what they are reading. The skills needed to interact with the text must be taught and modeled for learners. For anything you read, there was an author. That person had a whole coherent, perhaps, and complete idea that they wanted to explain, a set of information that they wanted to convey, or a story they wanted to tell. For a reader to get that story or understand that information, they must have background knowledge and life experience that provide context for the story or idea, and then be able to use that knowledge and those experiences to help them understand what the author is trying to say. The background a reader needs might include information about the topic, life experience that relates to the topic or are similar to those characters in the story, or experience reading similar texts. And most importantly, teaching comprehension requires explicit instruction. A poor reader cannot simply observe a strong reader and discern the variety of comprehension strategies that that reader employs to understand what he or she is reading. They must be explicitly explained, modeled, and applied with support and guidance from the tutor, and used over and over again. For the rest of this presentation, we'll be identifying various comprehension strategies and skills and how to teach them. There are two groups of tactics people can use to better understand what they're reading: broad-based strategies that can be applied widely, and specific comprehension skills. We're going to start with broad-based comprehension strategies that can be applied to a variety of reading topics and genres. They can be used before, during, and after reading. They include the following: setting a purpose for reading. Strong readers use this strategy when reading nonfiction to learn something. For example, when a person reads the newspaper or a website to find out what happened at a school board meeting, or when a person reads an instruction manual to learn how to program the timer on his or her coffee pot. Using background knowledge and prior experience. Readers use what they already know to help them understand and relate to what they read. This strategy can be used for fiction or nonfiction. It generally requires readers to have some idea of what the text is about before they read. Often readers will ask themselves questions to draw out their knowledge and experience. Making predictions. Strong readers predict what they expect to find in an article or what a character might do next. This strategy and the next one, asking questions and looking for answers, can help readers focus in order to look for specific pieces of information or to read and pay close attention to details. Strong readers make predictions before they read and while they are reading. They might combine this strategy with marking text, highlighting information, and taking notes. Asking questions. As they read, strong readers ask themselves questions and then look for answers in the text. This helps them to identify details and look for specific pieces of information. They also ask themselves questions after they read a portion of text to monitor their comprehension. If they can't answer their own questions, they may need to reread that portion of text. Marking text and taking notes. Strong readers often mark or highlight important points in the text. They may also take notes. Summarizing. Summarizing after reading is a good way to check comprehension. However, strong readers also break text up into smaller chunks and periodically summarize as they read. Rereading, especially things that don't make sense. This strategy often accompanies summarizing. We can teach learners to reread things when they are unable to summarize them or when their summaries don't make sense. To improve their comprehension, they may also need to apply new strategies while they reread. Reorganizing information. When they have finished reading, strong readers often reorganize information from a text into a new format, making it easier for them to understand and apply to other contexts. They connect it to what they already know and relate it to their own experience to make it more useful. For instance, a reader might fill out a graphic organizer, such as an information chart, draw a diagram, or summarize and number the steps of a process. Now we'll look at some specific comprehension skills that help readers to recognize how information is being presented, and they make decisions about that information. They include the following: recognizing cause and effect. A cause and effect organizational pattern is commonly found in news articles, history books, biographies, and fiction. Consider the article about the school board we mentioned above. A learner might read that some of the attendees were upset. Understanding the relationship between cause and effect can help the learner identify why the attendees were upset, which might be important information for them. Recognizing main idea and supporting details. You can't summarize a piece of text without recognizing its main idea and the details that support that idea. Good readers identify a text's main idea and make decisions about which details are important and which are not. Then they can summarize what they've read, internalize it, and use it. Because recognizing main idea and supporting details is such a foundational comprehension skill, learners are often asked to do it on academic tests like the GED. Distinguishing fact from opinion. This skill is critical for evaluating information. It becomes ever more important as the distinctions between news and commentary, articles and sponsored articles and ads, and science and sponsored science are blurred. Classifying information. Grouping or classifying the information in a text is an important comprehension strategy for remembering what you've read. Comparing and contrasting. Identifying important pieces of information about two or more items, then comparing and contrasting that information is a specific way of determining how items are alike and different. It's especially useful when you must evaluate or choose between two things. Sequencing events. Strong readers often order events or steps as they go about their everyday lives. For example, they might follow a recipe or follow a procedure at work. Often such sequences are easy to identify, but it's harder to follow a sequence of events in fiction when those events may move back and forth in time. In such cases, readers rely on keywords to help them identify the proper sequence. Note the comprehension monitoring plays an important role here. A reader must be able to recognize when a sequence doesn't make sense. Making inferences and drawing conclusions. Readers automatically draw conclusions as they read if they are concentrating on meaning. The text supplies the information, but the reader has to determine how the information can be used. Making inferences is more difficult because the information isn't clearly stated in the text. Readers must use clues and draw upon their own knowledge and experience to infer what the author means. This is why teaching learners to use their own knowledge and experience is important. And finally, understanding plot, character, and setting. Many learners do not realize that fictional plots follow a pattern. Rising action or tension leads to a climax followed by a resolution and wrap-up. Understanding genre, plot structure, character, setting, and other elements help readers understand and enjoy fiction. Using comprehension strategies and skills. Many of our learners are already using many or most of these skills and strategies every day, probably without knowing it, and not just in reading. Let's use cause and effect as an example. If I was to give you the effect of something that happened to me today, could you guess the cause? Let's give it a try. If I told you I was late to work today, what could some of the causes for that be? You might think that I stayed up too late, or I slept through my alarm. Maybe there was traffic on my way to work, or I could have gotten a flat tire. How did you come up with those potential causes? Because you had to either experience them yourself, perhaps, or know someone who did, or maybe you saw it in a movie or a TV show. That just shows that we are always using our experience to make sense of the world around us, to make guesses, to infer. And while we've tried to provide a good list of strategies and skills, it's not comprehensive. There may be more strategies or skills that could be used. But strong readers don't just need to know all of the strategies and skills. They need to be able to assess which ones to use when reading a specific article or story. Before we move on, we have provided on the resource page a handout called Reading Comprehension, which outlines all of the strategies and skills we just talked about. You will recall that we said at the beginning that comprehension instruction requires explicit instruction. The Think Aloud technique is one of the best teaching tools tutors have. As they may have guessed from the title, in this activity, a tutor reads a passage to the learner and periodically thinks out loud while applying different reading comprehension strategies. This allows learners to see the invisible strategies that a strong reader uses while reading. We're going to review together the steps of the Think Aloud technique. Step 1, review the reading and select the reading strategies you will use. While you might actually use many strategies, it's best to focus on 2 or 3 here. Identify the strategies you will use before you start reading aloud. Explain the strategies and why they are useful so that your learner can more easily identify them when they hear or see them used. Step 2, set the purpose for reading and be clear about it with your learner. This is the first thing a strong reader does, but many learners don't do this, especially if they've been assigned a reading. Setting the purpose will also help a learner connect specific strategies with specific purposes for reading. Step 3, read the article and model the strategies you identified. Model the strategies by stopping during the reading and thinking aloud. It's important to rehearse when you'll use the strategies and what you'll say, rather than demonstrating this on the fly. This will help you focus on the specific strategies and present them clearly. It is okay, even preferred, to show that the thinking process is not perfect. For example, you might make predictions that are wrong. Just explain that you've made an error, how you recognize the error, and your correction. While you're doing the Think Aloud technique, have learners follow along in the text and mark where you use different comprehension strategies. Step 4, identify the strategies and discuss how they were used. For short reading selections, do this step after you've finished reading the entire selection. If it's a longer reading selection, pick a good stopping point to review the strategies used. After that, you can continue on with the reading. Have your learner identify where you used each strategy and why that particular strategy was useful. Ask them if they can think of other things they've read where that strategy would be useful. Ask them to think of other strategies that you might have used. Step 5, give the learners something else to read and have them do the Think Aloud technique using the same strategies. So I will demonstrate the Think Aloud technique using this story, Bob is Late. First, I'm going to start by identifying the purpose for reading. I will read the story, Bob is Late. My purpose for reading is to find out who Bob is, what he was late for, why he was late, and what may have happened to him as a result of being late. As I read, I will use 2 reading strategies, cause and effect, and drawing on my own experiences. I'm going to draw on my own experiences because the characters in the stories may be like me and people I know. The story takes place in modern times. Therefore, I can use my own experience to understand the action of the characters. I will also be using my understanding of cause and effect in stories. I know from the title, Bob is Late, that something happens to Bob that makes him late. As I read the story, I will want to find out why Bob is late, the cause, and what happened to him because he was late, the effect. As I read the story aloud, follow along and pay close attention to when and how I'm using the reading strategies. You will know when I'm applying the strategies because I will say, okay, before continuing. So let's try this. Bob is late. Okay, the title tells me what happens to Bob. He is late for something. As I read, I will need to find out what he was late for, why he was late, and what happened because he was late. Bob woke up at 9 o'clock. He was late for his job. Okay, I just found out that Bob was late for his job. The story says he woke up at 9 o'clock. There's be no reason to put that information in the story unless it was important, which means he probably wakes up earlier than that to go to work. So I'm going to guess that one cause of why Bob was late is that he woke up late. He hoped Mr. Jones would not fire him. Okay, I guess the effect that Bob is concerned about is that he might get fired. From my own experience, I know that you can get in trouble for being late, but getting fired for your first time late seems a little extreme to me. Bob might just worry a lot. I'll have to continue to read to see what happens. Bob got a ride with a friend named Eddie. His friend Eddie did not have a job at the time. Eddie said to Bob, "Is Mr. Jones going to fire you?" Okay, so Eddie thinks there's a possibility that Bob might get fired too. That means that Bob might have good reason to be worried. Since I thought that getting fired was an extreme reaction, it makes me think there might be something else going on. Maybe this isn't the first time Bob has been late. I'll keep reading to learn more. "I hope not," said Bob. "I hate the job, but I need the money. If I had a lot of money, I would quit." Okay, this makes a little more sense now. Bob clearly does not like his job. He may actually be hoping he gets fired. I know from my own experience that when someone doesn't like a job, they usually don't do it as well as when someone does like it. And sometimes they are just bad at it. If Bob does get fired, I bet it's because he doesn't do his job very well. Or perhaps it's not a very nice place to work. Since Bob says he would quit if he could, that could also be one of the causes. "If you get fired, let me know," said Eddie. "Mike is going to the park with me at 10 o'clock. You can go with us if you do get fired." Mr. Jones did fire Bob, so Bob rode to the park with Eddie and Mike. Okay, Bob really did get fired. This is the effect of being late. The cause that is clearly stated in the story is that he was late for his job. My experience tells me that there's still something more going on. This is an extreme reaction to one time late. Bob doesn't like his job, so I think he maybe not been a very good employee, or maybe it wasn't a good place to work. Maybe because it wasn't a good place to work, he's been late a lot. Also, Bob's friends are going to the park, and this seems like something Bob would think is a lot more fun than going to a job he doesn't like. So maybe he wanted to be late and get fired. Maybe he didn't fight very hard to keep his job, and that could also be another cause. So you can identify where and how I applied the two reading strategies while I was reading the story. When I read the title, this told me the story was about Bob being late and indicated I might discover the reason why he was late, the cause, as I read the story. When I read about him waking up at 9 o'clock and thought about why that was in the story, that information combined with experience reading other stories and understanding that information is included for a reason, helped me figure out that Bob woke up late. When I read that Bob was worried about getting fired, my understanding of cause and effect told me that getting fired might be the effect of being late. But my own experience made me think that it wasn't likely, or at least not the only reason. When I read that Eddie thought Bob might get fired, this made me rethink that getting fired wasn't likely. So I drew on my own experience and thought there must be additional causes for Bob being worried about getting fired. This made me look for more evidence in the story. When I read that Bob wanted to quit his job, my experience told me that Bob might not be a good employee or that his workplace may not be very nice. And this could be an additional cause for his being fired. When I read that Bob was fired, this confirmed my thought about the causes. Applying comprehension strategies before reading. We're going to go back and examine more closely some of the comprehension strategies we mentioned earlier and talk about specifically how and when to implement them. One strategy strong readers use is to preview a text before they read it. This strategy works well for text that has pictures, headings, subheadings, diagrams, and descriptive titles. What sort of things might this work for? Well, magazine articles, newspapers. Can you think of some others? When learners are reading these types of text, tutors can teach them to preview the text by pointing out different elements and asking questions about it. For example, read the title of this article. What do you think it'll be about? Now take a look at this picture. What do you see? Read the caption. What did you learn? Now, what do you think you'll learn about in the story? It's important for learners to set a purpose for reading before they even read, even if that purpose is just to escape or relax. If relevant, discuss how the purpose affects reading strategies that the learner will use. For example, let's think about reading the instructions for programming a coffee maker. That has a very specific purpose. If this is what a learner is reading, you might want to discuss reading strategies such as reading the directions once to get the big picture, examining any diagrams that accompany the directions, and then reading each step and completing it before reading the next step. Activating background knowledge and prior experience. Why do you think this strategy is suggested for use before reading rather than during reading? The answer is that by thinking about what we already know and relevant experiences we've had, we activate that information. Fresh in our minds, it's easier to access and use. KWL charts are good tools here for helping learners activate background knowledge and prior experience. The last pre-reading strategy is making predictions about what learners think will happen. Making predictions help improve comprehension when learners read fiction, especially longer fiction that may be read over several tutoring sessions. It may be helpful to make a prediction chart. Then learners can go back and decide what was correct and what was not. Going back to evaluate predictions improves comprehension as learners review evidence that proves or disproves their predictions. Applying comprehension strategies during reading. Learners can improve their comprehension by using these strategies while they read. By learning these strategies, learners can begin to monitor their own comprehension. It's important to teach learners to read in chunks. Most texts will have natural chunks, paragraphs, sections, changes in scenes, or chapters. Learning to read text in chunks rather than all the way through at once is the first step to monitoring comprehension. A common comprehension monitoring strategy is to periodically stop while reading and summarize what was just read. If learners are unable to summarize what they've just read, have them reread the text, maybe in smaller chunks. This may also require them to use new strategies while they read to improve their comprehension. If one of the strategies used before reading was to activate prior knowledge and experience, then a good strategy to employ during reading is to periodically stop and make the connection between what they just read and that background knowledge. Ask learners questions to help them think about those connections. For example, the author stated blank in the article. In your experience, have you found that to be true? Or, which character in the story is most like you, and why? If learners are reading for information, you might ask them to look for specific things in the text. You can ask them to write down or underline the pieces of information. For example, you might say, in the next section, the author talks about 3 different kinds of fat. As you read, underline the names of those 3 types of fat. Most of these comprehension monitoring strategies involve asking questions. What was this section about? How does this information compare to what you already know? What did this character do and what information did you learn? In the beginning, you will ask these questions of learners, explaining that these are the types of questions that strong readers ask themselves as they read. As learners become better readers, they will ask these questions on their own. Applying comprehension strategies after reading. Here are some strategies that learners can use after they read to ensure they've understood what they just read. One of the most common strategies to teach learners to summarize what they just read. Maybe learners were summarizing individual parts of the story or the article as they were reading, but now it's time to see if the learner can connect those smaller summaries into a summary of the entire work. Some additional comprehension strategies for after reading are to make personal connections with the story or apply the information from the article to new contexts. Learners can reflect on how the main character's experiences are similar to or different from their own. You might ask the learner questions about what they would have done in a similar situation or how the characters in the text might have made different decisions if the circumstances had been different. Another strategy that readers can use to check their comprehension after they read is to reorganize information into a more useful format. Imagine you're reading an article about safety planning for your home and family. After reading the article, you might divide the information from the article into different categories: general safety principles, and then specific safety recommendations related to circumstances such as fire, power outage, tornado, or hurricane, etc. Graphic organizers are very effective for this. You can help a learner to use them to organize new information. After reading is also when you will work with learners to develop the comprehension skills we mentioned earlier. Identifying main idea and supporting details, comparing and contrasting information, identifying cause and their effects, and differentiating between fact and opinion. To develop these skills, you will need to explain each concept, provide real-life examples, and then have learners go back to the text to find the information or instances related to that specific skill. Levels of comprehension. When we check learners' comprehension, we probe at different levels. How well can they recall important details? Can they make inferences or draw conclusions that weren't specifically mentioned in the text? Do they understand the text well enough to apply what they've read in the other context? We can think of these different levels of comprehension as literal, inferential, and critical thinking. To check literal comprehension, we might ask learners to recall specific details or the order of events. Using the story Bob is late, we could ask the following questions. What time did Bob wake up? What is Bob's friend's name? What is Bob's boss's name? We could also check for literal understanding by asking learners to summarize a story or identify an article's main idea and supporting details. These types of activities check comprehension of the entire text, but still at a literal level. Once you are sure your learner understands the facts of the text, you can begin to ask inferential questions. In these, answers are not specifically given in the text. Learners need to combine textual clues with their own experience to come up with the answers. How and why questions can help check inferential comprehension. Here are some examples of questions that get at inferences. Why was Bob late? Why did Bob get fired? What do you think Mr. Jones thought when Bob showed up late for work? Do you think Eddie played a part in Bob getting late? Why or why not? The third level comprehension checks help us to see whether learners understood the information or story well enough to use it in other contexts. These questions might require learners to take what they've learned from the article or story and apply it to a different situation, to think more deeply about the characters, exploring their moods and motivations behind their actions, to develop an opinion or stance based on information from a range of sources, including this text, and then apply it to another text or context, compare and contrast elements in the text and make judgments based on that information, using the questions below to check for critical thinking comprehension about the story, Bob is late. Why do you think the author included the statement from Bob saying that he hated the job? And if he had a lot of money, he would quit. Responses might include these ideas to show that Bob didn't like his job, that getting to the job on time wasn't important to him, that he wouldn't fight hard to keep his job, or that he wouldn't be very upset if he got fired. How do you think the story would be different if this was a job that Bob liked? Answers may vary. Creating independent readers. Our goal is to create independent readers, and this is one way to do so. Tutors can write these questions on index cards and then teach your learner to use these generic questions to help them with comprehension monitoring. Before I read, I'm going to ask, what is this going to be about? What do I already know about the topic? What's my purpose for reading this? While I read, what do I think the next part is going to be about? Was I right or wrong? What else do I want to know about this topic? And then after I read, what did the article or story tell me? What did I have to figure out? What else do I want to know about the topic? Okay, we're now at the end of this module. Let's review what we've learned in this presentation. We identified comprehension skills and strategies. We defined literal, inferential, and critical thinking comprehension. We learned to use a before, during, and after approach. We learned to use graphic organizers. We practiced the think-aloud technique. If you have any questions at all about what we've presented here today, I encourage you to reach out to your tutor coordinator at your council. We appreciate your time and your interest in learning about reading comprehension. Thank you and have a very great day.